The alien queen, Zorvath, stood tall and proud in the grand hall of her palace, looking out over her kingdom. Her people, the Zorathians, were known for their strength, intelligence, and pride. They had long been an advanced race, far more powerful than humans, and Zorvath had always believed that humans were too fragile, too weak to be worthy of anything more than a partnership in trade. For centuries, humans had tried to form alliances with the Zorathians. The leaders of Earth saw the potential for mutual benefit, especially in terms of technology and defense. But Zorvath was not one to trust easily, especially when it came to humans. She had witnessed the destruction they left behind on their own planet, their wars, their greed. It made her believe that allowing any kind of relationship, especially a breeding partnership, between her people and humans, would be a mistake. Zorvath's resolve was clear. She had rejected every request for an alliance that involved humans in any personal way. To her, it was a matter of pride, and the thought of mixing with humans in any intimate form was something she found repulsive. She held herself in high regard as the ruler of her people, and could never imagine lowering herself to such a relationship. But Earth's latest ambassador was unlike the others. Captain Elias Harper was a soldier, not a diplomat. He had been chosen to represent humanity in the latest talks, not because of his political skills, but because of his ability to survive any situation. His reputation for bravery, intelligence, and strength had earned him the respect of his fellow humans and his superiors alike. Elias was the kind of man who could hold his ground, no matter the circumstances, and Zorvath was intrigued by the idea of meeting him. As she prepared for the meeting, Zorvath found herself both curious and annoyed. She didn't need some soldier to come to her world to negotiate. She had already made up her mind, and no one, certainly not a human, would change that. Still, the idea that this soldier had been sent to represent Earth made her wonder. Perhaps this human was different from the others. Perhaps, just perhaps, he might be worth meeting. The door to the hall opened, and in walked Elias Harper, tall and confident. His uniform was pristine, but it was clear he had seen battle. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet strength that demanded attention without ever saying a word. His deep brown eyes scanned the room before landing on Zorvath. She could see the respect in his gaze, but there was also something else, something she couldn't quite place. "Queen Zorvath," Elias said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable confidence. "It is an honor to meet you." Zorvath tilted her head slightly, taking in the sight of the human soldier. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation in his step. His presence, though humble, seemed to command respect. She hadn't expected that. She had imagined a nervous human, unsure of himself in the presence of a powerful queen. But Elias was different. "The honor is mine, Captain Harper," Zorvath replied, her voice firm and commanding. "But I must be clear from the outset. My people and yours are not equals. We will never share a bond beyond that of a simple alliance. I will not allow anything more." Elias did not flinch. "I understand, Your Majesty. I'm not here to change your mind about anything. I'm here to help facilitate the alliance between our people. If that means we remain strictly diplomatic, then so be it. But I think it's worth considering the possibility that we can offer more than just a trade agreement. We can learn from each other. Together, we could build something stronger than either of our worlds alone." Zorvath narrowed her eyes, studying him. He was not like the others. Most humans came into meetings with requests and demands, their intentions thinly veiled behind polite words. But Elias spoke plainly, without trying to hide his true purpose. She respected that. She also didn't like it. She didn't like the idea of someone questioning her beliefs so directly. "Learn from each other?" Zorvath repeated, her tone cold. "You suggest we allow our worlds to mingle in ways that would make us vulnerable. Your people are not like mine, Captain. I cannot allow such foolishness. Breeding with humans? That is an idea that will never come to pass." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "I wasn't talking about breeding, Your Majesty. I was talking about the future of our people, about collaboration and mutual understanding. But if you believe that's impossible, then there's little left for us to discuss, isn't there?" Zorvath felt a spark of anger at his words. She had always prided herself on her ability to control every situation, to maintain the upper hand in all negotiations. But Elias had a way of speaking that made her question herself even for a moment. She pushed the feeling aside, letting her pride and authority take over. "Then our discussion ends here, Captain," she said firmly. "I have no interest in playing games. Humans are weak, fragile, and unreliable. My people have no need for such alliances." Elias bowed his head slightly, his expression calm. "I understand, Your Majesty. I'll make sure my people know where you stand. But if you ever change your mind, if you ever see things differently, I'll be here." Zorvath watched as Elias turned and walked out of the room, his confident stride not once faltering. There was something about him that she couldn't shake off. His words, his demeanor, they bothered her. They made her question her own convictions. And for the first time in a long time, Zorvath felt the stirrings of doubt. Days passed since the first meeting between Zorvath and Captain Elias Harper. The Queen couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. Elias's unwavering confidence in his words, though calm, had left a mark. Despite her efforts to remain unaffected, she found herself thinking about him far more than she wanted to admit. His boldness had challenged her beliefs, and that was something she wasn't used to. For the following week, Zorvath immersed herself in the responsibilities of ruling her people. There were war councils, diplomatic meetings with other alien races, and of course the ongoing discussions about the potential alliance with Earth. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her mind would often drift back to Elias. He was everywhere, his words echoing in her thoughts, his face flashing in her memory. The human soldier had shaken her to the core. Captain Elias, for his part, had been busy as well. He was not the sort to waste time pondering what had been said in a meeting. His purpose was clear. He had been sent to establish peace between Earth and the Zorathians, no matter how difficult the task. He spent his days working alongside Zorvath's advisors, helping to plan for the protection of both Earth and the alien world from the ever-present threats in the galaxy. But even in these tense discussions, Elias could not ignore the stirring curiosity that the Queen had sparked in him. He admired her strength, her sharp intellect, and her leadership. There was no denying that Zorvath was a ruler unlike any other. But he also saw the walls she had built around herself, walls made of pride, fear, and an unyielding belief that humans were beneath her. Elias understood her reasoning, but he could also see the potential for something more between their two worlds. And it frustrated him to no end that she refused to even consider the possibility. One morning, as Elias was walking through the palace gardens, he saw Zorvath standing at the edge of the fountain. The sunlight glinted off her armor, and her posture was regal, like that of a lioness preparing to defend her pride. She was deep in thought, her eyes distant and lost in the world of her own worries. Elias hesitated, unsure whether to approach her. But he had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was no different. He stepped forward, his boots making soft sounds against the stone path. "Your Majesty," he called out, his voice warm but respectful. Zorvath turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the human soldier. She had been expecting him, but the sight of him still caused a flicker of irritation to rise within her. It was a strange feeling, a mix of annoyance and something else she couldn't quite place. "What is it, Captain Harper?" she asked, her tone formal but not unkind. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," Elias said, taking a few steps closer. "About what you said. And I wanted to ask you something." Zorvath raised an eyebrow, clearly uninterested. "I don't have time for endless debates, Captain. I've made my position clear." Elias smiled slightly, refusing to back down. "I know, but I'm not here to debate. I'm here to listen, to understand. I want to know why you believe humans are so unworthy." Zorvath stiffened. The question was too direct, too personal. She had always prided herself on her control over her emotions and her kingdom. To be questioned so openly by a human, by a soldier no less, was something she hadn't expected. But there was something in Elias's voice, something genuine, that made her want to answer. So she did. "I've seen the way your people live," she said, her voice cold but not without a hint of vulnerability. "I've seen the destruction you leave behind, the wars you fight, the chaos you cause. You destroy your own world, and then you come here, asking for something more. I cannot allow my people to be dragged down into that madness." Elias listened carefully, his expression softening. He understood her concerns. He had heard them from others before. But he also knew that Zorvath's view was one-sided, shaped by the events she had witnessed. He had to show her that humans were more than their past mistakes. "I won't deny that we've made our share of mistakes," Elias said, his voice steady. The days that followed Elias's conversation with Zorvath were filled with tension, but also subtle shifts. Zorvath had always kept a distance from humans, her coldness a barrier between herself and the rest of the galaxy. But Elias was different. He didn't push her, nor did he shrink back when she tested his patience with her sharp tongue or stubborn refusal to compromise. Instead, he simply remained calm, letting her see that he was not like the others. In some strange way, this began to disarm her. Zorvath had always believed in strength above all else. Strength in body, strength in mind, and strength in resolve. She had seen the frailty of humans too many times to respect them. But Elias showed her something new. His strength was different from hers. It wasn't about how much force he could exert, but rather how much patience he could endure, how much heart he could invest in something that seemed impossible. For the first time, Zorvath found herself questioning whether strength could take a different form. It was early one morning when Zorvath found herself walking along the palace walls, looking out over the city. The sunlight cast long shadows, painting the city in warm hues of gold and orange. The stillness of the early hour brought a sense of peace, but it also gave room for the thoughts that had been building in her mind. Elias had stirred something in her, a feeling she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the soft crunch of boots behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Elias. He was always so quiet, so sure of his steps. She had learned to recognize his presence, even when he didn't say anything. "Your Majesty," Elias said, his voice respectful but not overbearing. "I was hoping to speak with you." Zorvath turned to face him, her expression neutral. She had never quite known what to make of him, yet his presence had become something she couldn't ignore. "What is it, Captain Harper?" she asked, her tone still formal. Elias gave her a small, friendly smile, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of sincerity, that made Zorvath pause. "I wanted to talk to you about our progress. I know we've had our differences, but I believe we're making headway. I think there's a way we can create something that benefits both of our worlds, but only if we trust each other." Zorvath felt a flicker of unease at his words. Trust. It was a word she had never given freely. It was too dangerous, too fragile. But as she looked into Elias's eyes, she saw something there that made her question herself. Perhaps for once it was worth considering. "I'm not sure what you're asking for, Elias," she said carefully, her gaze softening just slightly. "We still have many obstacles to overcome, and I have my own doubts." "I understand," Elias replied, his voice steady. "But without trust, without at least trying, we'll never know what we can truly accomplish. I don't want to force anything, Zorvath. I just want to give us both the opportunity to see what could be." Zorvath felt a strange warmth in her chest at his words, but she quickly dismissed it. She was the queen. She couldn't afford to get too close to a human soldier, no matter how sincere his words might be. Yet every time Elias spoke, there was a new layer of respect, of understanding that seemed to form between them. And she couldn't deny that something about him made her feel differently. "I'll consider what you've said," Zorvath said, her tone softer than she intended, "but that is all I can promise." Elias nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's all I ask for, Your Majesty. Thank you." The next few days were marked by more frequent meetings between Zorvath and Elias. They worked together, side by side, discussing strategies for peace, ways to strengthen the alliance between Earth and the Zorathians. Elias never pushed her, never tried to persuade her too strongly. He simply spoke from the heart, sharing his thoughts and ideas in a way that made Zorvath listen, really listen. One evening, after a long day of work, Elias invited Zorvath to join him for a walk in the gardens. Zorvath hesitated. She wasn't used to spending time in such casual settings, especially not with a human. But something in Elias's invitation felt genuine, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she agreed. As they walked along the winding paths of the palace gardens, Zorvath found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated. She told Elias about her people, about the long history of her race and the weight of responsibility that came with her position as queen. She spoke of the pride and strength that had kept her people safe for so long, and of the fears that had driven her to reject the idea of mingling with humans. Elias listened intently, never interrupting, never rushing her. His presence was calm, reassuring, and for the first time, Zorvath felt as though she could let down her guard. There was something about Elias that made her feel safe, something in the way he accepted her, despite their differences. "You're afraid," Elias said after a long silence, "afraid that humans might fail you, fail your people." Zorvath looked at him sharply. "I'm not afraid," she replied quickly, her voice cold. "I am merely cautious." Elias stopped walking and turned to face her. "But there's a difference between caution and fear, Zorvath. You've been fighting your fear all this time, refusing to allow yourself to trust anyone. But trust is a choice. It's not something you can control with strength alone." Zorvath felt a pang in her chest at his words. It was true. She had always relied on her strength to protect her people, but in doing so, she had closed herself off from the possibility of something more, something she had never allowed herself to consider. "I don't know how to trust Elias," she admitted, her voice softer now, tinged with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "Not after everything I've seen. Not after everything my people have been through." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder gently, his touch light but reassuring. "Then let me show you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We don't have to rush it. Trust doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with a choice, a small step." Zorvath looked up at him, and for the first time in her life, she saw a human, not just as an outsider, but as someone who might truly understand. His eyes were full of kindness, of hope, and of something she had never expected from a human, a desire to truly understand her, to truly stand beside her. "I'm willing to try," Zorvath said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I cannot promise anything." Elias smiled, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "That's all I ask for, Your Majesty, one step at a time." As they continued their walk through the gardens, Zorvath felt a strange sense of peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges between their two worlds were vast. But for the first time, Zorvath allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way forward, a way that didn't rely solely on strength, but on trust, understanding, and the willingness to change. The following weeks passed, with a blend of uncertainty and progress. The relationship between Zorvath and Elias had evolved from cold formality to a tentative friendship, built on respect and understanding. They still had many obstacles to overcome, but they were learning to trust each other. Slowly, carefully. Zorvath had never expected to find common ground with a human, but Elias had proven to her that not all humans were as she had imagined. But even as they worked together to build a bridge between their two worlds, danger loomed just beyond the horizon. The peaceful alliance between the Zorathians and Earth was still fragile, and external forces threatened to tear it apart. A rogue faction of alien warlords had begun to stir unrest, seeking to take advantage of the political instability. They saw the alliance as a weakness, an opportunity to assert their power. One evening, as Zorvath and Elias met in the war room to discuss their next steps, the tension in the air was palpable. Zorvath's sharp eyes scanned the reports laid out before her. The news was grim. The rogue faction, known as the Kalor, had begun raiding human colonies near the border of Zorathian space. It was only a matter of time before their attacks escalated. Zorvath looked up from the reports, her face set in a stern expression. We cannot allow the Kalar to continue their raids. If we do not act swiftly, we risk everything we've worked for. Elias nodded, his brow furrowed in concern. Agreed. We need to strike back before they can gain any more ground. We'll need to hit them hard and fast, but we can't do it alone. Zorvath met his gaze, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding between them. We will need to unite our forces, she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. The Zorathians and the humans must fight side by side. There is no other way. Elias's lips tightened into a grim line. Then we'll do it, together. The decision was made, and within hours, the armies of Earth and the Zorathians were mobilizing. Zorvath and Elias knew that the battle ahead would test not only their strength but their ability to trust each other completely. In the heat of war, there was no room for doubt. As the two forces set out on their mission to confront the Kalar, Zorvath couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had never fought alongside humans before, and the thought of putting her people's safety in their hands was unsettling. But Elias had proven himself time and time again. He had earned her respect. She had no choice but to trust him. The battle took place on a barren world, a desolate landscape that seemed to echo the darkness of the conflict they were about to face. The air was thick with tension as the Zorathian and human forces prepared for. The battle had ended, but the quiet aftermath was filled with tension. The Kalar were defeated, but there was no time for celebration. The world they fought on was still scarred by the destruction. Zorvath and Elias had led their people to victory, but the weight of leadership still hung heavily on their shoulders. Zorvath stood at the front of the battlefield, looking over the wreckage. Her armor was scratched and stained, her body sore from the fighting, but her mind was sharp. The Kalar had been driven back, but the threat wasn't over. Their faction would regroup, and Zorvath knew that another battle could come at any time. But it wasn't just the war that weighed on her. Elias's presence had stirred something inside her that she wasn't sure how to handle. She had always believed that she could remain above such emotions, that her duty to her people would always come first. But now, she couldn't help but think of the human soldier who had fought by her side. His strength, his determination, and the trust he had shown her, it had changed something inside her. Elias approached her slowly, his movements calm, though his face was bruised and bloodied from the fight. He stopped a few feet away, watching her closely. "You're thinking too much, Your Majesty," he said quietly, his voice a comforting presence in the silence. "We've won, and we did it together." Zorvath turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not over, Elias, you know that. The Kalar will return. They always do." Elias nodded, understanding her concerns. He had known from the beginning that the peace between their people was fragile, but this victory was still important. It was a step forward, even if the road ahead was uncertain. "We'll face them again when the time comes," Elias said. "But for now, we need to rebuild both our worlds. This is the beginning of something new." Zorvath studied him for a moment, taking in the determination in his eyes. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that she couldn't ignore. In that moment, she realized how much she had come to depend on him, not just as an ally, but as a partner. "Perhaps you're right," she said, her voice softening, "but I can't help but wonder if there's more to this alliance than just survival. Can we truly build something more?" Elias's eyes met hers, his expression open and sincere. "That's what I've been hoping for, Your Majesty. I've always believed that we can do more than just survive. We can thrive, together." Zorvath felt a strange stirring in her chest at his words. She had never imagined herself considering a future beyond the confines of her kingdom. She had always been so focused on protecting her people, on keeping her power intact, that she had never allowed herself to think of a world where alliances were built on something more than politics and strategy. "Elias," she began, her voice hesitant but growing stronger. "I've spent so long focused on duty. I've never allowed myself to imagine what could happen if we trusted each other fully, if we truly worked together as equals. Elias took a step closer to her, his voice gentle. Then maybe it's time to start imagining, Your Majesty. Maybe it's time to see what we can build together. Zorvath looked at him, the weight of her responsibility pressing on her chest. She had always been the queen, strong, unyielding, and focused on the survival of her people. But now, Elias had shown her a different way, a way where strength didn't mean isolation, a way where alliances were built on respect, trust, and the willingness to work together for a greater purpose. I don't know if I can fully trust Elias, Zorvath admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not yet, but I'm willing to try. Elias smiled, his eyes warm and understanding. That's all I ask for, Your Majesty. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the understanding that they were on the cusp of something new, something uncertain but full of potential. Zorvath knew that the road ahead would be difficult. She would have to convince her people to accept humans as allies, to trust that the future they were building together was worth the risk. But for the first time, she felt that it was possible. Later that evening, Zorvath stood before the council of her people. The war had been won, but there was still much work to be done. The Kalor had been pushed back, but they weren't defeated. Zorvath had to decide how to move forward, whether to continue the old ways or to embrace the possibility of a new future. Her mind drifted to Elias. She knew the council would be skeptical of a human alliance, but she also knew that her people needed to see the potential for peace, not just the fear of conflict. She couldn't keep pushing Elias away, couldn't keep rejecting the idea of unity between their races. The council chamber was filled with murmurs as Zorvath entered. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her as she took her place at the front of the room. The counselors, wise and experienced, had always trusted her judgment, but they had also never seen her question her decisions as much as she had in the past few weeks. My people, Zorvath began, her voice carrying the authority that she had always relied on. We stand at a crossroads. The war is over. But the future is uncertain. We have defeated the Kalor, but there are others who would seek to destroy us. I have seen the strength of our enemies, and I know that we must adapt if we are to survive. The room fell silent, the counselors listening intently. We have worked with the humans to secure this victory, Zorvath continued, her voice steady. And I believe that together, we can build something more. We cannot continue to live in fear of what others might do. We must look toward the future, and in doing so we must embrace the idea of unity, not just for the survival of our people, but for the future of all our worlds. There was a long pause as the counselors exchanged glances. Zorvath could feel the weight of their skepticism. They had never considered humans as more than allies in war, never imagined that they could be anything more than tools for survival. But Zorvath's words were sincere, and they carried the conviction of someone who had come to realize that there was more to the future than the cold walls of tradition. Finally, one of the counselors, an elder named Tavros, spoke. You ask us to trust humans, Zorvath, to risk our future on an alliance with a race we have always viewed as inferior. Zorvath met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, I ask you to trust them. But more than that, I ask you to trust me. I believe that this alliance is the key to our survival and to our future. Together, we can create something stronger than either of our races alone. But we can only do that if we are willing to take the first step. The council murmured amongst themselves, the tension thick in the room. Zorvath could feel the weight of their doubt, but she also knew that this was her moment. She had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was no different. After a long silence, Tavros spoke again, his voice softer. We will follow your lead, Zorvath. If you believe in this alliance, we will support it. But you must prove that this is more than just a fleeting idea. Show us that it is worth the risk. Zorvath nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the beginning of something new, a future where the strength of both races would be combined, where trust and unity would define their future. I will, Zorvath said firmly. I will prove that this alliance is worth the risk. Together we will build something stronger than we've ever known. As she left the council chamber, Zorvath couldn't help but think of Elias. She had taken the first step, but the journey was far from over. She still had much to prove, not just to her people but to herself. And for the first time, Zorvath allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Elias were not just allies, but partners in something greater. The days that followed the council meeting were filled with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Zorvath had taken the first step toward building a new future, a future where the Zorathians and humans could stand together, side by side as equals. But even as the decision was made, the weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. There were still many who doubted the alliance, and the journey ahead would not be easy. Zorvath had always prided herself on her ability to lead with strength, but this was different. This wasn't just about strategy or politics. This was about trust. Trust in her people, trust in the humans, and perhaps most importantly, trust in herself. She had spent her life building walls to protect her people, but now she was being asked to tear those walls down and embrace something uncertain, something new. As she stood at the balcony of the palace, looking out over the sprawling city, Zorvath couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had spent so long focused on her duty as queen that she had never allowed herself to consider what might come after the war, after the battles. She had always believed that strength alone would protect her people, but now she was beginning to understand that there was more to leadership than just power. There was compassion, trust, and a willingness to adapt. Zorvath's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Elias. He had become a constant presence in her life, someone she could rely on in ways she hadn't expected. "Your Majesty," Elias said, his voice calm but filled with an underlying tension. "We need to talk." Zorvath turned to face him, her expression serious. "About what?" Elias stepped forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "About what happens next. The council has agreed to the alliance,